Get Rich or Die Tryin is not a fantasy about desperation. It is the discipline of the man who finally understands no one is coming and decides that every wound now has to work. The false belief is that abandonment makes you powerful. It does not. Abandonment only removes excuses. It also exposes you. Without structure, solitude becomes rumination, resentment, addiction, and days that disappear while you call your bitterness strength. The mechanism is simple. Pain must be converted into measurable proof, hours protected, skills built, money stacked, body trained, attention controlled, promises kept when nobody claps. And do not confuse isolation with power. If your solitude produces nothing, it is not monk mode. It is avoidance with a harder name. The abandoned man becomes dangerous only when he stops needing validation and starts building evidence. This is how isolation becomes discipline, and discipline becomes leverage. Look at 50 Cent before Get Rich or Die Tryin. He was shot 9 times. His Columbia Records album was shelved. He was dropped from the label. The industry did not gather around him and say, "We understand your pain, let us save you." No. The machine moved on. And that is the first reality abandoned men must accept. The world can watch you bleed and still continue with its schedule. After that, 50 Cent did not wait for pity. He went underground. He recorded new material. He pushed mixtapes. He made noise where he could make noise. He turned rejection into distribution. He turned danger into output. He turned being counted out into proof that could no longer stay invisible. Then Eminem and Dr. Dre took notice. That is the question most men avoid. Why do some abandoned men become ruthless builders while others become bitter spectators? Same loneliness, same doubt, same lack of support. Same feeling that family does not understand, friends do not believe, and society does not care. Yet one man turns pressure into proof. The other turns pressure into excuses. That is not because one man suffered more. Suffering is not rare. Almost every man can build a religion around his wounds if you give him enough silence and enough time. The difference is not the pain. The difference is the system the pain enters. Pressure does not transform a man automatically. Pressure only reveals what system he already obeys. If he obeys distraction, pain will send him deeper into distraction. If he obeys resentment, pain will give him more reasons to hate. If he obeys validation, pain will make him beg harder to be seen. If he obeys discipline, pain becomes raw material. Machiavelli wrote that he wanted to follow the real truth of the matter, not the imagination of it. So here is the real truth. Your pain will not save you. Your tragic backstory will not pay your rent. Your loneliness will not build your body. Your family's doubt will not build your skill. Your friend's lack of belief will not create your offer. Your resentment will not become money unless you discipline it into action. And the cost of misunderstanding this is brutal. You lose years, not one dramatic failure, not one cinematic collapse. Years. Years of scrolling while calling it recovery. Years of imagining revenge while avoiding execution. Years of saying they do not understand me while having no visible evidence that there is anything to understand. Years of consuming discipline content while your room, your bank account, your body, your calendar, and your reputation all testify against you. This is why most men do not fail from lack of ambition. They fail because their ambition never becomes structure. They have desire, but no calendar. They have anger, but no training block. They have visions, but no sales calls. They have taste, but no skill stack. They have pain, but no proof. And after enough time, the world stops asking what they meant to become and starts judging what they repeatedly did. That is cold. But it is also liberating. Because if the world judges proof, then proof can change your position. Law 1. Your pain must be given a job. Pain without direction becomes resentment. Pain with direction becomes fuel, but do not misunderstand this. Pain does not become fuel because you feel it deeply. Pain becomes fuel only when it is assigned to measurable behavior. If the wound does not change your calendar, your body, your skill, your savings, your output, or your standards, it is not fuel. It is just memory poisoning your day. Every wound must be converted into a system. If you were ignored, build visibility. If you were doubted, build proof. If you were broke, build skill. If you were abandoned, build self-command. If you were humiliated, build standards. If nobody supported you, then stop treating support as the first requirement. Build the part nobody can vote on. Build the hour before the world can interrupt you. Build the ability that improves whether they clap or not. Build the evidence that removes your need to be emotionally rescued. Pain must be made useful, or it becomes a parasite. A man who says, "Nobody supported me," has two choices. He can use that sentence as a prison, or he can use it as a command. No one supported me. Good, then no one owns the outcome. But the moment you say that, your excuses die. Now your mornings matter. Your attention matters. Your body matters. Your money matters. Your word to yourself matters. Your inputs matter. Your environment matters. Your ability to say no matters. Your ability to repeat boring actions when nobody is watching matters. Because no one is coming to enforce your future. So you must become the authority. John Paul DeJoria, the billionaire behind Paul Mitchell and Patron, did not start with comfort. Forbes reported that when he and Paul Mitchell founded John Paul Mitchell Systems in 1980, they had $700. DeJoria was homeless, sleeping in an old Rolls-Royce while selling shampoo door to door. That is not a motivational poster. That is pressure meeting structure. Pressure, homelessness, action, sales. First proof, doors knocked, product moved, bills eventually paid. Power lesson. He did not convert rejection into identity. He converted rejection into volume. That is what most abandoned men miss. They want the wound to mean they are special. No, the wound only gives you raw material. You still have to process it. You do not get paid for being wounded. You get paid when the wound forces you to become useful, rare, disciplined, visible, or valuable. You do not become respected because life was unfair. You become respected when your response becomes undeniable. The market does not ask how deeply you suffered before deciding whether your offer matters. It asks whether you can solve, build, sell, lead, produce, endure, and repeat. This is the first brutal separation between boys who romanticize struggle and men who convert struggle into leverage. The boy says, "Look what happened to me." The man says, "Watch what I build from it." If you are the right viewer, stop false progress. You already know the problem is not that nobody believes in you. The problem is that your life has not produced enough proof to make belief irrelevant. Staying the same means another year of consuming hard truths while your habits remain soft. On Patreon, I go deeper into the private systems behind proof, positioning, discipline, funnels, leverage, and self-command. It is not for men who want comfort. It is for men who are ready to turn pressure into structure. The decision is yours. But even if pain has a job, most men still fail because they give the world their best hours. This is the next trap. A man says he wants freedom, but his cleanest energy belongs to his employer. He says he wants a business, but his best attention belongs to his phone. He says he wants a stronger body, but his evenings disappear into exhaustion and escape. He says he wants to become undeniable, but the first hours of his day are surrendered before his mission receives anything. So the question becomes darker. When does an abandoned man actually build? Law 2, build before the world wakes up. The abandoned man needs hours nobody can steal. Early mornings, late nights, locked routines, protected focus. These are not aesthetic choices, they are survival infrastructure. If your job owns your day, your future must own your morning. If your environment drains your energy, your mission must have protected hours before the noise begins. If your family doubts you, stop giving them the only hours where you could become difficult to doubt. If your phone breaks your focus, stop pretending discipline is a personality trait. Discipline is often an environmental design. Your weaker self must be given fewer exits. This is where practical psychology matters. Research by Peter Gollwitzer and Pascal Sheeran on implementation intentions shows that goal execution improves when people specify the when, where, and how of action in advance. Code translation. Do not say, "I need to get disciplined." That is weak. Say, "At 5:30 in the morning, at my desk, phone outside the room, I write for 90 minutes. Say, at 7 in the evening, after work, gym bag already packed, I train for 45 minutes. Say, at 9 in the evening, before entertainment, I send 5 outreach messages. A vague man loses to his environment. A structured man turns the environment into a trap for his future self. You do not rise because you are inspired. You rise because the system gives your weaker self fewer exits. This is why abandoned men cannot afford vague ambition. Men with support can sometimes survive waste. Men with family money can make mistakes and recover. Men with networks can be introduced into rooms they did not earn. Men with safety nets can fall and land softly. But the unsupported man has less margin. He cannot afford to spend his strongest years negotiating with his moods. His focus has to become protected territory. His morning has to become private property. His body has to become an asset. His skill has to become a weapon. His money has to become oxygen. His word to himself has to become law. Because if he does not govern himself, the world will govern him through bills, bosses, algorithms, cravings, old perceptions, and emotional dependency. Howard Schultz grew up poor in a Brooklyn public housing project. CBS reported that when he was 7, his father was injured on the job, and the family had no health insurance, no compensation, and no protection. Schultz later built Starbucks with employee benefits shaped by that childhood scar. Pressure, poverty, and seeing his father discarded. Action, he built a company around the wound. First proof, a business model that connected coffee, experience, and employee treatment. Power lesson, he did not merely escape the memory, he weaponized it into company architecture. That is the difference between pain and doctrine. Pain says, "Look what happened to me." Doctrine says, "This is the system I will build because of what happened." Most men never reach doctrine, they stay at reaction. They keep replaying the insult, the betrayal, the childhood, the doubt, the rejection, the woman who left, the family that laughed, the friend who did not believe, the boss who underestimated them. They think repetition gives the wound meaning. It does not. Repetition without action only deepens the groove. At some point, the serious man stops asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and starts asking, "What structure must exist because this happened to me?" That question changes everything. Because now pain is no longer a story you tell yourself at night. It becomes architecture, it becomes training, it becomes savings, it becomes a portfolio, it becomes a product, it becomes a public record, it becomes a body that cannot be explained away, it becomes a skill that survives opinion, it becomes a reputation that keeps speaking when you are not in the room. But there is one trap here. A man can build alone and still be weak. Because isolation is not automatically strength. Law 3, do not confuse isolation with strength. Isolation can sharpen you or destroy you. The difference is output. If your solitude produces no skill, No money, no body, no offer, no discipline, no cleaner mind, no stronger reputation, and no measurable progress. It is not monk mode. It is avoidance wearing a masculine mask. Some men isolate because they are focused. Other men isolate because they are afraid of being seen before they are proven. One is discipline. The other is hidden shame. This distinction matters because many men use solitude as a costume. They disappear from people, but they do not build. They stop going out, but they do not train. They stop explaining, but they do not produce. They call themselves private, but really they are hiding from comparison. They call themselves focused, but their screen time exposes them. They call themselves dangerous, but nothing in their life has become more precise, more useful, more valuable, or more difficult to ignore. That is not power. That is retreat. Machiavelli warned that men judge heavily by appearance and result. In The Prince, he says, people see what you appear to be, but few know what you really are. This matters because the world cannot reward the invisible man. You may be deep, you may be talented, you may be misunderstood, you may be capable. You may have a vision your family cannot understand and a level of hunger your friends cannot relate to. But if none of that becomes visible proof, society treats it as non-existent. That is not fair. But power has never been built on fairness. Power is built on evidence. The abandoned man must understand this without becoming bitter. Bitterness says, they should see me already. Strategy says, I must produce a signal strong enough to interrupt their indifference. There is a difference between being underestimated and being unproven. Being underestimated means they are wrong about your ceiling. Being unproven means they do not yet have enough evidence to know. The dangerous man does not waste his life arguing the difference. He builds until the difference becomes obvious. So ask yourself with no performance, no drama, no self-pity. What has your isolation produced? Not what has it helped you imagine, not what has it helped you feel, not what has it helped you resent. What has it produced? A stronger body, a sharper skill, more savings, better writing, better offers, better discipline, better emotional control, a cleaner reputation, a public record, a portfolio, a business, a system, a circle of serious allies, a mind that is harder to manipulate? If the answer is no, then your solitude is not yet power. It is only distance. And distance without direction becomes decay. And decay does not always look dramatic. Sometimes decay looks disciplined from the outside. A man deletes the distractions, avoids people, stops explaining himself, spends more time alone, and tells himself he is becoming serious. But privately he is checking reactions. He is wondering who noticed his silence. He is waiting for someone to ask where he went. He is hoping absence will become a message. That is not self-command. That is still validation, wearing the clothes of independence. This is why isolation alone is not enough. Isolation removes noise, but it also removes witnesses. And when there are no witnesses, a man discovers whether he actually has standards or whether he was only performing discipline for approval. The next enemy is not society. It is not your family. It is not your friends. It is not the people who doubted you. The next enemy is the validation reflex. Law 4. Break the validation reflex. The abandoned man must stop checking who noticed. Stop checking whether your family finally respects you. Stop checking whether your friends watched. Stop checking whether she liked the post. Stop checking whether strangers validated your pain. Stop checking whether the people who doubted you are secretly regretting it. Every time you check too early, you give your nervous system back to the crowd. And this is where many men lose power without realizing it. They do the work, but emotionally, they are still reporting to the same people they claim to have outgrown. They lift the weight, then imagine who will notice their body. They make money, Then imagine who will feel embarrassed for doubting them. They post the work, then refresh the numbers until the numbers become their mood. They call it ambition, but underneath it is still dependency. The man has left the room, but the room is still inside him. That is why announcing goals can be dangerous. Gollwitzer and colleagues found that when others notice someone's identity-related intentions, it can create a premature sense of already possessing that identity. Cold translation. Talking about becoming disciplined can give you the emotional reward of discipline before you have earned the evidence. Talking about becoming rich can give you the identity pleasure of ambition before you have built the asset. Talking about changing your life can sedate the part of you that actually needs to change. This is why many men feel powerful after speaking and weak when it is time to execute. The speech gave them the feeling. The action demanded the cost. And because the feeling already arrived, the cost suddenly feels optional. So stop performing transformation. Document proof. The man who needs applause before action is still owned. The man who executes when nobody claps is becoming sovereign. There is a colder level of this most men do not want to face. Sometimes the people you want validation from are not qualified to validate the path you are walking. They may love you, but they do not understand the terrain. They may know your past, but not your capacity. They may be familiar with your weaknesses, but blind to your development. They may think they are protecting you, when in reality they are protecting their image of who you used to be. Family often remembers who you were. Friends remember your old rank. Society judges your current evidence. This means you cannot build your future by holding emotional court with people who are invested in your old identity. Do not argue with old witnesses. Create new evidence. If your father sees you as irresponsible, stop delivering speeches. Build a record of responsibility so consistent that the accusation becomes outdated. If your friends see your work as a hobby, stop defending the dream. Build numbers, build clients, build revenue, build skill, build distribution. If a woman saw the weaker version of you, stop trying to prove your worth through reaction. Become the man whose life no longer requires her interpretation. Validation is expensive when you need it before movement. It is cheap when it arrives after proof. This is the shift. You do not build so they finally approve. You build so approval no longer controls your behavior. That is self-command. And self-command is not emotional numbness. It is not pretending nothing hurts. It is not becoming a statue. It is the ability to feel the pull of approval and still execute without waiting for it. It is the ability to feel loneliness without making loneliness your master. It is the ability to be doubted without turning doubt into a daily court case inside your mind. Most men are not controlled by enemies. They are controlled by imagined audiences. They wake up and ask, what will they think? A disciplined man wakes up and asks, what must be built? That question separates the man who performs ambition from the man who produces leverage. But once validation is removed, the man faces the ugliest question. What do I do every day when nobody cares? Law 5, stack proof. Quietly, 1 workout. 1 page, 1 offer, 1 skill session, 1 outreach, 1 sale, 1 saved dollar, 1 hour without distraction, 1 kept promise. This is how the abandoned man rebuilds himself, not through speeches, through evidence. You do not become undeniable in one heroic moment. You become undeniable through small acts that compound until your old identity can no longer contain you. The problem is that most men underestimate small proof because it does not feel dramatic enough. They want the breakthrough, the viral moment, the sudden recognition, the investor, the mentor, the woman, the family apology, the public victory. But power usually enters quietly first. Before the world sees the body, there were private workouts. Before the money, there were rejected offers. Before the reputation, there were invisible repetitions. Before the skill, there were bad attempts. Before the leverage, there was proof nobody clapped for. This is why the abandoned man must become loyal to evidence before recognition. 50 Cent's first proof after being dropped was not a motivational quote. It was material, mixtapes, songs, distribution, noise in the underground. Then the market moved. Then Eminem moved. Then Dre moved. Then Get Rich or Die Tryin sold 872,000 copies in its first 4 days in stores. That is the power sequence: pressure, production, proof, distribution, leverage. Most men want leverage without proof. They want opportunity without evidence. They want respect without repeated demonstration. They want support before progress. They want the world to notice their potential before their behavior justifies attention. But Machiavelli understood the cold law of outcomes. In the actions of men, one judges by the result. Not your intention, not your wound, not your potential, the result. That is why the abandoned man must become obsessed with evidence. Evidence is what protects him from being reduced to his past. If you were inconsistent, evidence is how you become trusted again. If you were broke, evidence is how you become financially dangerous. If you were weak, evidence is how you become difficult to dismiss. If you were invisible, evidence is how you make ignoring you more expensive. But evidence must be stacked quietly because the early stage is fragile. Early proof is easy to kill when you expose it too soon. A weak routine can be destroyed by one sarcastic comment if your identity is still unstable. A new business idea can be poisoned by the wrong person's doubt if you have not yet built enough conviction through action. A young discipline can collapse when you turn it into a public performance instead of a private contract. This is why silence is strategic. Not because secrecy is mystical, because premature exposure invites premature judgment. And premature judgment can sedate action or provoke defensiveness before the system is strong enough to survive attention. Build until the proof has weight. Build until one missed compliment means nothing. Build until one doubtful comment cannot move your hand away from the work. Build until your identity is no longer negotiated daily. If you are the right viewer, you already know when your progress is real and when it is theater. The real problem is not lack of information. It is lack of a system that forces proof to compound when nobody is watching. Staying the same means another year of private ambition with public weakness. Inside Patreon, I break down the deeper systems behind discipline, proof, positioning, funnels, leverage, and self-command without soft language. It is not for men collecting motivation, it is for men building evidence. The decision is yours. The abandoned man wins by compounding what others ignore. One kept promise becomes self-trust. Self-trust becomes consistency. Consistency becomes skill. Skill becomes proof. Proof becomes positioning. Positioning becomes leverage. Leverage becomes options. Options become freedom. And freedom is the real meaning of wealth for a serious man. Not luxury first, options first. The power to leave, the power to say no, the power to stop negotiating from weakness, the power to choose work, rooms, relationships, and battles from a stronger position, the power to no longer be trapped by people who use your dependence as leverage against you. That is why money matters. Not because money makes a man superior, because lack of money makes many men obedient. A broke man often has to tolerate disrespect longer than he should. A dependent man has to explain himself to people who control his options. A financially fragile man cannot always choose the honorable move because survival pressure speaks louder than pride. A man without savings is easier to threaten. A man without skill is easier to replace. A man without leverage is easier to ignore. So when I say stack proof quietly, I do not mean collect little achievements for your ego. I mean build assets that make you harder to control. Your body is proof of self-command. Your skill is proof of usefulness. Your savings are proof of optionality. Your portfolio is proof of competence. Your reputation is proof that your behavior has become visible. Your offer is proof that your value can enter the market. Your discipline is proof that your future no longer depends on your mood. This is where the abandoned man stops being a story and becomes a force. But there is still a final law. Because even if you give pain a job, protect your hours, stop hiding in isolation, break the validation reflex, and stack proof quietly, people will still remember your past longer than you want them to. They will remember the old version, the broke version, the uncertain version, the emotional version, the inconsistent version, the man who talked more than he executed, the man who needed approval, the man who explained himself too much. And if you do not understand this, you will waste energy trying to force people to update their judgment through conversation. That is the last trap. Your family remembers the old you. Your friends remember your old rank. Your workplace remembers your replaceability. Society remembers nothing until you produce a signal strong enough to interrupt its indifference. Law 6. Become the man. They cannot reduce to his past. Do not argue with old perceptions. Outgrow them. If they call you lazy, build a body and a work history that makes the word look ridiculous. If they call you unrealistic, build numbers. If they call your work a hobby, make it generate money. If they see the old version of you, give them less access and more evidence. This is not about revenge. Revenge keeps the enemy inside your nervous system. Revenge means they still decide the emotional meaning of your life. A man driven only by revenge may build, but he remains psychologically owned by the people he claims to have defeated. This is about replacement. You replace explanation with output. You replace resentment with standards. You replace fantasy with proof. You replace dependence with options. You replace the abandoned identity with the unowned identity. Machiavelli also wrote that a ruler must understand both the fox and the lion, the fox to detect traps, the lion to frighten wolves. For the abandoned man, this means two things. Be the fox, recognize the traps. The trap of resentment, the trap of over-explaining, the trap of announcing too early, the trap of isolation without output, the trap of confusing pain with power, the trap of needing applause before action, the trap of believing potential should be rewarded before evidence exists. Then be the lion, build visible strength, a stronger body, a useful skill, a sharper offer, a cleaner reputation, a deeper savings account, a public record of execution, not aggression, presence, not cruelty, proof, not revenge, leverage. A serious man does not need to become loud when his evidence becomes heavy. He does not need to convince every person who doubts him. He does not need to be understood by people whose incentives are tied to his old identity. He does not need to turn every room into a trial. He builds until the old story becomes too small. This is where the old identity must die. You are not the abandoned man anymore. You are the unowned man. There is a difference. The abandoned man says, "No one helped me." The unowned man says, "No one controls me." The abandoned man waits to be seen. The unowned man builds until blindness becomes expensive. The abandoned man uses pain to explain his delay. The unowned man uses pain to organize his discipline. The abandoned man secretly wants the people who doubted him to become his audience. The unowned man stops needing them in the room. The abandoned man thinks being unsupported proves he is special. The unowned man knows being unsupported means he cannot afford weakness. This is the true meaning of Get Rich or Die Tryin for a serious man. It is not about worshipping money. It is about refusing to remain trapped in a life where you need permission from people who cannot see your future. Rich means options. Rich means mobility. Rich means skill. Rich means proof. Rich means leverage. Rich means the power to leave. Rich means the ability to stop negotiating from weakness. And die tryin does not mean self-destruction. It means the death of the weaker identity. The death of the man who needed applause. The death of the man who waited to be chosen. The death of the man who confused loneliness with destiny. The death of the man who called bitterness strength. The death of the man who used abandonment as an explanation instead of a command. This is the final separation. Some men are abandoned and become dependent on the wound. They keep returning to it because without the wound, they would have to face the work. Their pain gives them an excuse, an identity, a reason to delay, a reason to feel different without producing difference. Other men are abandoned and become structured. They do not deny the wound. They do not pretend it was fair. They do not romanticize it either. They assign it to a job. They make it pay rent inside their future. They force it into training, skill, savings, distribution, discipline, and proof. One man says, "I was abandoned, so I became bitter." The other says, "I was abandoned, so I became precise." One says, "No one believed in me, so I stopped trying." The other says, "No one believed in me, so I stopped needing belief as fuel." One says, "They never saw me." The other says, "Then I will build something too visible to ignore." This is not motivation. This is governance. You are either governed by the wound or you govern the wound. You are either commanded by loneliness or you command loneliness into structure. You are either owned by the need to be seen or you build until being seen becomes a consequence, not a requirement. That is the discipline of the abandoned man. Abandonment does not make a man powerful. Discipline does. Solitude does not make a man superior. Output does. Pain does not make a man deep. Structure does. The world does not owe you belief. It responds to proof. So give every wound a job. Protect ours. Nobody can steal. Stop confusing isolation with strength. Break the validation reflex. Stack proof quietly. Become the man they cannot reduce to his past. That is how isolation becomes discipline. That is how discipline becomes leverage. That is how the abandoned man becomes impossible to dismiss. And before you leave this, do not turn this into another video you agree with and forget. Choose one action today that becomes evidence. One workout, one page, one offer, 1 hour of focused work, one skill session, one outreach message, one saved dollar, one promise kept when nobody claps. Then comment, turn isolation into proof, not as a slogan, as a contract. Because the man who only understands this will feel strong for a moment. The man who acts on it will become dangerous over time. No support, no permission, no more explaining. Build anyway.